Okay, we're going back into the darkness this morning. I wish to yet again talk about a controversial subject. I recently watched a piece on Simon Whistler's Into the Shadows channel on the Janjaweed militia in Darfur, a region of South Sudan, who have now been reborn as the RSF. They are basically Arab militias who seek to slaughter, displace, loot, and indeed the R word, African factions. For most of the noughties and the first half of the 2010s, they were synonymous with mass slaughter, looting, burning, kidnapping, R word, and various other incredibly nasty tactics. International efforts for a while didn't pay off, but they faded into the background, and now they've been reborn as the RSF. Don't ask me what that stands for, I've forgotten. So yet again, genocide, murder, looting, and the R word is sweeping Darfur. We don't hear about it in regular news, as Mr. Whistler says. Any survivors who come out of this are going to be traumatised for life, and this is the factor I want to look at. In the US, I imagine it's still Mexico, Cuba, Haiti. These are where your refugees come from, largely. Although I think even some African refugees from such areas as Sudan are coming through. But the majority of the refugees in Europe and the UK are from the Middle East, Ukraine, and these troubled regions of Africa. And herein lies the problem. We have seen basically some of these refugees end up in extremism because of PTSD, untreated post-traumatic stress disorder. When you have witnessed your family slaughtered in front of you, your wife R'd and possibly mutilated, when you have seen all this stuff, how can you still be normal and sane? You would have to be a very, very strong person indeed, not for it to not affect you. And herein lies the problem. I understand in some Scandinavian countries there are moves to treat these people before they're released into wider society, which is a good thing, but many European countries, I'll focus on the UK here, do not seem to be addressing these issues at all. Literally, some poor bugger who's escaped Darfur, or one of the other numerous trouble spots where these kind of horrific atrocities are happening. They're given clothes, they're given a mobile phone, they're given a hotel room. And apparently a lot of, I will call them my fellow countrymen, resent even that. And then some of them will go on to commit atrocities of their own, because all they've witnessed throughout their adult or teenage life is atrocities. Can you imagine what's going on inside their heads? You probably can't. I can't. I'll be honest there. So, ideally, for people from these trouble spots, there needs to be some kind of psychological assessment, and then, if needs be, aid. I've heard the argument we should treat our own first. That is absolutely true. But trauma, PTSD, for residents of this country is often very personalised unless they're ex-military. So childhood abuse, spousal abuse, witnessing a mugging or a murder, that kind of thing. Unless, of course, someone is ex-military. There are far too many military veterans left to live on our streets because they're dealing with largely undiagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder. And if other mental illnesses were present already, they're only going to be exacerbated by it. I'm sure my friends in America, you've probably witnessed just such a thing with your own ex-servicemen. I believe Five Finger Death Punch wrote a song about it, didn't they? Wrong Side of Heaven or Righteous Side of Hell, I believe it was called. It's nice to see bands address issues like that. You know, because they're right. But if you're going to take in refugees from these trouble spots, there needs to be a vetting process. I mean, I have first-hand knowledge of this once. Just after COVID lockdown, I spent 2 or 3 weeks on a psychiatric ward due to the fact I knew I was vulnerable, I knew I was on the edge. So I checked myself in. It's the first time I've done that in years. That's the first time I've done it. The only other time I'd been in any form of official psychiatric care was over 25 years ago. And that was basically enforced because of a crime I committed, which is the one and only crime I've ever been charged and found guilty of. Other than that, I have a pretty clean slate with the law. And these days, I intend to keep it that way. But I got chatting to an African gentleman, I forget which trouble spot he came from, but there are many in Africa, who had a massive scar across his neck, where basically a militiaman had slit his throat. He witnessed these acts when he was a boy of 12. He perhaps was one of the lucky ones. He was actually in psychiatric care. But what had he done to get there? I didn't ask, and I don't want to know. So I've no doubt he committed some crime to get there. Because these days, the state of mental health services in the UK, you know, public, not private, is atrocious. And if it's atrocious enough for our own people, how the hell do we treat these people from these horrendous war zones? You can't just leave them to roam the streets, surely. There has to be systems put in place to vet these people, to psychologically figure them out, to give them the care they need. Just giving them a mobile phone and some clothes in a hotel room, an allowance, that ain't enough. You know, I've heard the arguments, we're overcrowded, our systems can't cope. Well, the reason our systems can't cope is because they've been neglected. They've been kept on life support for years. The NHS, social services, all these things that need to be in place to help these people has been neglected, sold off. And you cannot run something like mental health services for profit. It's like you cannot run social care for profit. It does not work. At least it doesn't work if you're going to focus on care. Something needs to change within the system. Someone needs to step up and say, this cannot go on. If we are going to be humane and take in refugees from these trouble spots, they need to be properly vetted and cared for. The horrors these people have witnessed, no one can go through that unchanged. No one. And if you claim you can go through those horrors unchanged, then there's something wrong with you in the first place, or you're just incredibly thick. Or you're incredibly strong. Personally, in my own mind, with some of the stuff that I've witnessed, had done to me over the years, I'm 50-50 as to whether I'm strong or just mental. It's a fine line. As a quote I found on Facebook a while back says, you know, on the surface there is absolutely no difference between bravery and stupidity. It's all underneath, isn't it? I've done some stupid shit in my time. To be honest, I think 50% of the time I've traumatised myself through my own actions. But, you know, I've never had to go through what some of these refugees have gone through. I don't ever want to. The only solution is for governments to spend money. And for, you know, normal immigrants, they don't spend it there. They rely on charities. You know, there are a couple of charities in Ipswich that teach English language to immigrants, which is a good thing. There are legal centres set up to give them advice. I can think of two within a 10-minute walk of me. And yet services for citizens are in a dire state. Citizens Advice Bureau, you're lucky if you can get hold of them. Especially in person. I mean, yeah, you can make phone calls to them. But even then, you'll be lucky. And this is the problem. Like many countries across the world, one of the main moans you hear from the working UK residents is tax. I don't want to pay tax. Fine, you don't want to pay tax? Okay. Don't moan about the state of services then, if you don't want to pay tax. Don't moan about the fees for the private school you're sending your kid to get an education, if you're also moaning about not wanting to pay tax. Because if you paid your taxes at an appropriate level, a fair level, then, you know, government-funded schools would be better, and you wouldn't have to send your child to a private school. The roads would be better. The influx of traumatized refugees from civil wars and ongoing wars across the world, they would be properly cared for in proper facilities, vetted, checked out, and given the care they need. Okay? There would be youth clubs, so hopefully you wouldn't have to moan anymore about the hoodies, young teenagers who have their hoods up all the time. That's in the UK, that's one of the names for them. Who, smoke weed, hang about on street corners, drop their rubbish everywhere and cause trouble. Because they'd have somewhere to go. I mean, I had a bunch of them roughly 2 years ago decide to use where I train currently, Outback, as their own personal youth club for smoking weed and also huffing nitrous oxide one night and making a huge row. Eventually, through the police, help from neighbours, we got rid of them. They still live in the area. I've seen one or two of them. A couple of months ago, they came back. And basically, as one of them came past my kitchen window, I was like, if I can see you there again, I'm calling the police. Now, piss off. And personally, the other day, I caught familiar faces from down the road at the back of mine, which is a bit like a mini council estate trailer park, American equivalent. And there are some good residents there, but there are a lot of people who ain't good. And I caught two of them dumping another piece of broken furniture right outside where I train. Apparently someone was coming to pick it up. I was like, yeah, all right. And he had the cheek to grin, one of them. I regularly walk down there these days, so if I spy which house they come out with and get the number, I'm going to be reporting them, because I'm fed up with mattresses, broken furniture, bags of rubbish being dumped. And yet again, if councils were properly funded, it wouldn't be there for 3 weeks before it was sorted out. Because a lot of people don't have, personal transport in the UK to get to a dump. This I understand. So maybe, they could fund, patrols that will go around and pick up this stuff as soon as it's reported, rather than it sitting there for 3 weeks. But this all costs money, doesn't it? Money is especially tight at the moment with the ongoing world situation, where the British government is starting to try and get the army up to speed. You've got the Challenger 3 project, basically taking the Challenger 2 main battle tank that was designed and put in service in the 90s and upgrading it, and also making it NATO compatible. Because we British have always been very awkward about this. Basically, British tanks use two-piece ammunition, so the warhead and the charge is stored separately. It's put together before it goes in the gun. This meant it was totally incompatible with any other NATO tank when it comes to sharing ammunition. Apparently part of this upgrade, I forget the name of the bloke, but I got this from another channel. Very pleasant American chap who does know what he's talking about. Maybe if I look it up, I'll put a note on the video, highlighted comment to thank him for his insights and information. Shout out to, I've forgotten. So they've decided to fit the new version, amongst other things. Obviously it's had a lot of electronics and protection upgrades. But they have decided to fit a smoothbore, which obviously can use a lot of sophisticated ammunition, Rheinmetall cannon, rather than the old British Ordnance one that the Challenger 2 had. I think it was a British Ordnance one. And a lot of the electronics and communications devices have been upgraded to be compatible with all NATO armies. Of course, we still have that very individually British thing, the boiling vessel to make tea in the tank. That's very British. And I love it. It's one of those little eccentricities that I am still inordinately proud of. I do drink tea, by the way. I mostly drink coffee, but I am partial to a cup of Yorkshire tea. They're not sponsoring me, unfortunately. So yeah, I understand that money is tight because of the world situation that is ongoing, and could at any time get significantly worse. Because the world economy isn't exactly stable, and when the world economy takes a downturn, other conflicts will flare up. There are several low-grade conflicts across the world, as they call them, that could flare up into full-blown war. It's happening all over the place. But these things need funding. You cannot take in traumatized refugees who've seen the full horror of atrocity. As I said, we'll give them a mobile phone, some trainers and some new clothes in a hotel room and an allowance, and leave them be. These people need proper care. So do the native British people on our streets. I accept that too. I'm not making them a priority. They all need care, okay? They all need care. Something needs to happen. Something needs to change. And, you know, we need to look after our countrymen first. We don't have room anymore, people. You're just being divisive. All human beings are entitled to the same level of care and attention. You know, there'll always be exceptions. There'll be those who are just beyond help entirely. But these people need secure facilities to hold them. Not everybody is redeemable. That much I understand. You know, but these cases need to be weeded out and found. Not allowed to run loose in the streets with God knows what and God's know what delusions in their head. This wasn't the video I had planned. It just got inspired by a video I was watching on Simon Whistler's Into the Shadows channel. I emphasise that again. Shout out to Simon Whistler and your many channels. And I think that's about it for this morning so far. Well, peace, if only. Maybe there's no rest for the wicked, eh? New Model Army song, that one.